Story 1. The Man in the Bathroom.
I was 16, a junior at Oak Ridge High School, and my day consisted of 9 periods. After lunch in the cafeteria, I had my next class geography. Unlike the rest of the classrooms, which were spread across 3 floors, our geography class was in a small, secluded room in the school's basement. The school, while large, couldn't accommodate all its classes on the main floors, so they had to make use of the basement. The space had been converted from old storage areas, with the only lighting coming from a few faint overhead bulbs. It was cool down there, and because it was a basement, there were no intercoms or loudspeakers. It was an eerie spot, with a quiet and almost abandoned feel, especially when no one else was around. We jokingly called the basement the dungeon. Despite the creepy vibe, students often liked getting classes there since it was air-conditioned and less crowded. That day, we had a quiz in geography, which I finished early since the material was easy for me. Bored out of my mind, I texted my friend, Max, who was in the room next door in the same basement. I told him I was going to the bathroom and asked him to meet me there. He agreed, and shortly after, we were both hanging out in the quiet, dimly lit restroom. Max checked his phone and suddenly looked up, telling me that the school had gone into lockdown. We both grinned at the same time. Neither of our teachers had noticed us leave the classrooms, which meant we had free reign of the school during the lockdown. We agreed to sneak upstairs to explore, not really thinking much about the consequences. Worst case scenario, we just explained we hadn't heard the announcement. As soon as we stepped out of the basement door into the main hallway, something felt off. The lights in the hallways were completely off. Usually, the lights remained on during lockdowns, but not this time. The only light came from the windows near the lobby. It felt darker than usual. Something was definitely happening. Max stepped further into the hallway and suddenly stopped. "Who's that?" he whispered. I looked up and saw a figure emerging from the shadows, walking slowly toward us. At first, I thought it might be one of the teachers, but as the person got closer, I realized they didn't look like any staff member I recognized. The man was dressed in ragged clothes, his jacket torn, and his unkempt hair hanging over his eyes. "Let's go," I muttered. We hurried back to the basement, feeling like we were being watched. We quickly slipped into the restroom again, hoping to stay out of sight. As soon as we were inside, I turned off the light, and we crouched in the farthest stall, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The silence was unbearable. There was nothing but the sound of our breathing and the occasional drip from the sink. Then, the door to the bathroom opened, and light flooded the room briefly before the door slammed shut. We froze. Someone was walking toward us. The steps were slow, deliberate, and heavy. Max whispered that we needed to crawl to the other stalls, but even his whisper seemed loud in the quiet. Just as he spoke, the footsteps stopped, and a heavy, labored breath filled the room. Someone was standing right outside our stall. The person reached for the door handle and tried to open it. We could hear the faint click of the handle turning. "Go," I whispered urgently to Max. We crawled under the stall divider and moved to the next stall. As we were making our way across, the man started banging on the door of the stall we had just left. The sound was deafening. We kept moving, finally reaching the farthest stall, and as soon as we were there, I saw a sliver of light coming through the crack in the bathroom door. I quickly opened it, and we found ourselves back in the hallway. The light was brighter now, and we could see the man in the corner, his back turned as he paced angrily. Max and I rushed to knock on the door of his class. The teacher opened it immediately, and we rushed inside, explaining everything to him. Max mentioned he had seen a gun sticking out of the man's pocket. I didn't see it, but I didn't question him either. A loud bang echoed against the door, and the whole class jumped. We could all see the man standing outside, his face pressed against the small window in the door, glaring at us. He tried the doorknob a few times, but it was locked. After a few more frustrated bangs, he turned and walked down the hallway. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever, the teacher asking us questions every now and then. Everyone in the class was on edge, and no one dared to laugh or make light of the situation. Eventually, we were instructed to leave the classroom in single file and head out of the building, where the police were waiting for us. The authorities took our statements, and Max and I did our best to describe the man. Despite our efforts, we never found out who he was or if he was ever caught.
Story 2. The Man at the Door.
It started like any other Friday. It was 7th period, the final class of the week before spring break. Everyone in my calculus class was restless, staring at the clock, counting down the minutes. Our teacher, Mr. Larson, was known for being easygoing, so instead of working on a new lesson, he decided we'd play some trivia games to pass the time. He pulled up a game on a site called quizwise.com, one I'd used before. It featured trivia challenges on everything from world capitals to movie quotes. Today, we were tackling a brand logo quiz. I distinctly remember my friend Jared calling out an answer, Adidas. We all groaned, annoyed he got it before the rest of us. That's when it happened.
This is not a drill. All teachers go into lockdown immediately.
The room froze. For a moment, no one moved or even breathed. Then Mr. Larson, whose laid-back demeanor had vanished in an instant, sprang into action. He switched off the lights, gestured for us to huddle in the back corner of the room, and locked the door. His hands trembled as he pulled the blinds over the windows.
Is this real?
And another person shushed them harshly. A soft buzzing noise, the kind that came from the control panel at the back of the room, abruptly stopped. It was the sound of the school's power being cut.
I'll kill all of you.
He shouted. The words hit us like a punch to the gut. 2 girls immediately started crying, their muffled sobs adding to the rising sense of panic. The man's voice grew louder, his screams more incoherent. Then came the banging. He was slamming something in his fists against the lockers outside. Mr. Larson whispered, holding a finger to his lips. His face was pale, his usual calm demeanor replaced with visible fear. The banging moved closer, from the lockers to our classroom door. The handle rattled violently as the man screamed, "Open up!" One of the crying girls let out a small scream before covering her mouth. But it was too late. The man pounded on the door harder, shouting obscenities. It felt like the door would burst open at any moment. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding, praying he wouldn't get inside. The seconds dragged on like hours. Then, as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped. His screams grew fainter as he moved down the hall, still shouting and slamming against lockers. It wasn't over, though. For what felt like an eternity, we sat in silence, straining to hear any sounds that might signal his return. Finally, the loudspeaker crackled again. Mr. Conway's voice, though calmer, still carried a tremor.
The intruder is no longer in the hallways. Teachers, keep your doors locked. Resume teaching, but do not allow students to leave for any reason.
We all stared at each other, disbelief etched on our faces. How could they expect us to go back to normal after what had just happened? Mr. Larson, still visibly shaken, hesitated before returning to his desk. He didn't even bother turning the lights back on. We sat in the semi-darkness, unsure what to do. Later, we learned more details. The man was mentally unstable and had assaulted the woman at the front desk when she tried to stop him. She had fled the building, screaming, which was how the staff first realized something was wrong. The police arrived and conducted a sweep of the school, but couldn't find him. It was as if he had vanished. The scariest part came that evening. One of the janitors, working the night shift, found the man asleep in a storage closet at the far end of the school. Rumors spread quickly the next day. The janitor had seen the handle of a .44 Magnum sticking out of the man's pocket. Before the police could arrive, the man had slipped away again. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. Was he caught? Did he get the help he so clearly needed? I try to tell myself that he's somewhere safe, far away from schools and innocent people. But whenever I think about that day, I can still hear his screams, the banging on the door, and the sheer terror in those moments when we weren't sure if we'd make it out alive.
Story 3, The Basement Encounter.
I'm 22 years old, fresh out of college, and recently started working as a computer intern at my old high school. The job came easily. I'd always been close with my computer teachers, Mr. Harlow, Ms. Chung, and Mr. Nash, who practically fought to get me the position. My workspace was in the basement, a cluttered labyrinth of old desks, wires, and outdated technology. Despite the chaos, my office was surprisingly nice, a cozy nook with 3 large desks, a flat-screen TV, and blissful air conditioning. On the day of the lockdown, I was alone in the office, eating a turkey sandwich during my lunch break. My co-workers, Gary and David, were upstairs working on some network issues. I was mid-bite when the phone on my desk buzzed. It was Ms. Reed, one of the front office staff. Her voice was tense.
The school is on lockdown. Someone's entered the building, possibly armed. Stay where you are.
My stomach twisted. The basement office didn't have a door, just an open entryway that led to the main basement corridor. The door at the top of the basement stairs didn't lock either. I turned off the lights, silenced my phone, and slid under my desk, hoping no one would think to look down here. For the next 20 minutes, the only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant echo of footsteps from above. I couldn't hear what was happening upstairs, but the tension was suffocating. I texted Gary and David to ask what was going on, but neither responded. Then the basement door creaked open. My heart leapt into my throat. Heavy, deliberate footsteps descended the stairs, one at a time. I froze, every instinct telling me not to make a sound. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever it was stopped at the office doorway. I held my breath as the person stepped into the office. They didn't turn on the lights, but I could feel their presence, hear their steady breathing. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then my phone vibrated, the soft buzz deafening in the stillness. The footsteps shifted, heading straight toward my desk. I clenched my teeth, fear rooting me to the spot. A voice broke the silence.
Hey, it's okay. I'm hiding down here too.
I looked up and saw a man standing there, his face obscured by the shadows. He wore a red plaid shirt and a baseball cap, and his calm demeanor sent chills down my spine. He claimed he was a parent, caught in the lockdown while picking up his son. Something about his story didn't sit right, but I nodded along, too scared to question him.
Is there an exit down here?
He asked. I pointed toward the back of the basement, where an emergency exit led outside. As he turned around, my phone buzzed again. This time, I glanced at the screen. It was a text from David. Dude, this is crazy. Some guy with a gun shot Mr. Brooks, red shirt, baseball cap. Stay hidden. Whatever you do, don't come upstairs. Double quotes. My blood ran cold. I looked up at the man who had stopped and was now staring at me, his expression unreadable. I realized he must have seen the change in my face. Without thinking, I bolted for the stairs. A gunshot rang out, the deafening crack echoing through the basement. I heard the bullet ricochet off metal, but I didn't stop running. I burst into the stairwell, yelling for help. Police officers were stationed at the exits and quickly apprehended the man as he tried to flee. Later, we learned he had a personal vendetta against Mr. Brooks, but the details were never made public. Thankfully, Mr. Brooks survived, but I'll never forget the sound of that gunshot or the terror of looking into the eyes of a man with nothing to lose.